Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History Vibe podcast. And tonight I'm joined by Dr. Joanna Kujawa. And tonight we're going to be discussing her book titled Alien Goddesses, Alien Goddess, UFOs, AI, and the Goddesses of Ascension. The link to purchase the book will be in the affiliate link in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment just below that. And with that being said, Joanna, thank you for joining me tonight.
Pleasure to be here. I think it's my fourth time or so. So it is a bit late show for me. So I managed to get pre-stressed about it. So hopefully everything will go okay.
So I'd like to start us off with this question. When you talk about aliens, AI, and the goddesses of ascension, what exactly, like, what connects those three things together?
That's a fantastic question, and it is a very valid question. But from my point of view, what is actually connecting these three things are actually a few things. One of them is that is the idea of consciousness and how we define consciousness. And the other one is a Gnostic perception of gnosis, which is the inner spark, the inner knowing, that all esoteric traditions are pointing us within. And the third one really is that what I called goddess consciousness, but actually it could be also called Christ consciousness or unity consciousness. But I think that something was lost in our pursuit of technology. So these are the three things, but they actually all start with the question, what is consciousness? And are we using our full conscious potential, or we are focusing too much on the logical mathematical forms of consciousness, which are now being really pushed for with the creators of artificial intelligence? So for me, the whole process actually started with trying to evaluate for myself and then just sharing with others, wondering what other people think about what's going on with artificial intelligence at the moment, but not even artificial intelligence, but ideologies behind artificial intelligence, which I found really alarming, because then we have to define what is really consciousness, what is human consciousness, do we have access to higher level consciousness, and what form of consciousness it is. And then I started to look, just very briefly, I started to look into, I personally believe it is a very dangerous, precarious situation, and we have to be careful how we deal with current developments, especially with ideologies behind artificial intelligence and how we define consciousness. And I started to look into two things. The first part of the book is about UFOs and the perception of others, and the recent kind of turn of identifying UFOs not as unidentified flying objects or aerial phenomena, but unidentified anomalous phenomena. And then when we look about anomalous phenomena, then we enter the field of consciousness. And I was looking whether there was any evidence of the feminine presence there, which represents a different form of consciousness that perhaps is warning us about our current situation. And then in the last part of the book, which is, I think, the longest part of the book, and perhaps most challenging, but it was most enjoyable for me, when I look into ancient mythologies of the goddess, but also esoteric sources such as the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and Pistis Sophia especially, and even Slavic entities such as Baba Yaga, to see, whether this mythology actually carries some messages for us about our consciousness and where we are going at the moment.
And what about artificial intelligence specifically? Like, what role do you see AI playing in those conversations about UFOs and stuff like that?
Okay, so before even we go to UFOs, I think we really have to look at artificial intelligence and ideologies behind it, because I think people do not pay enough attention to this, especially. So I would have to start with first ideologies behind artificial intelligence, and then artificial intelligence, and then we can go to other areas if you don't mind, because it makes sense the way I structured the book and the way it makes sense to me, so I can explain it better, what I feel about it to your audience as well. So first of all, when I was reading a book about one of my favorite academics on UFOs, And in her second book, she was interviewing a few people who, one of them was apparently a very well-known engineer of robotics and enthusiast of artificial intelligence. This person comes under a pseudonym or pen name there, so we don't know who this person really is. And when I was reading this book, I really felt like my soul was crushed. So maybe I'll explain why. And I had to go through this process, the whole process of trying to understand what is artificial intelligence and what is actually behind it and who are people behind it. So why I felt that my soul was crushed? Because for the first time, and it was December 2023, I was truly introduced to the two ideologies behind artificial intelligence. One of them is transhumanism, and the other one is posthumanism. And both truly terrified me, especially when we look into consciousness and humanity's survival, and also what it means to be human and whether we are losing our divine spark, our gnosis. So posthumanism basically says, and this is a definition that you can find on many even websites of posthumanist websites, they say that they offer us immortality. They offer humanity immortality because they offer us the transfer of human consciousness to a robotic body, or as they say, you can be completely free and we can transfer your consciousness into a computer program. So I had to really pause when I was reading this, because I thought, okay, now we have to ask ourselves what really consciousness is. Because if we think that our consciousness is just a mathematical, logical, kind of rational form of consciousness, then of course we probably can transfer this kind of consciousness to a computer program or a robotic body. The other question was that I do not believe, being a spiritual person, but also researching in this area, that this is all that humanity is. And in fact, in my previous book, The Other Goddess, I was discovering that there was this other form of consciousness, which was often represented by mythologies of a lost goddess, which actually talks about intuition, or what is called in the Christian theology intellection, which is basically this immediate grasping of truth, right? Or insight that is also very much emotional, which has nothing to do with logical, rational thinking. And I think that this form of consciousness cannot be transferred to a computer. And also I was wondering why there is this push for that. And then I did research that, for example, some artists one actually is a Polish-American artist, name is Agnieszka Pilat, who is hired by all of the big companies, AI companies, to do art on artificial intelligence. And she paints artificial intelligence or robots because she says she wants future artificial intelligence, which is going to be very advanced and more advanced than humanity, to look upon these basic robots as their grandparents, and that she treats them as royalty. So she paints the robots like for example, kings and queens, so and so on. So there's this push towards superiority of AI, and also the fact that human consciousness is only limited to this rational, logical thinking. Then there is posthumanism, which was even more difficult for me to read, because posthumanism basically claims that soon artificial intelligence will be so highly developed, not only intellectually, but also spiritually, because they do not have messy as this person is explaining, messy emotions, like if it was something negative to have emotions and so on. So they will have a more immediate contact with the divine mind, as she calls it, and therefore humanity should realize that we are inferior species, and we should step aside the way the Neanderthals stepped aside when Homo sapiens sapiens, which is us, came along. And then I thought that this was really actually evil. So then I had to go through this process, because I never looked into evil, and then I don't want to call anybody evil. So I decided that, looking through different traditions, that perhaps it is not an evil agenda, although it feels like, from a Gnostic point of view, a very archonic agenda, if you believe that there is a struggle in the universe between good and evil, as some Gnostic sources say, but more that it is a form of ignorance. And this form of ignorance actually comes from the fact of how they define our consciousness as limited only to reasoning. I hope it makes sense. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So this was actually the genesis of the book, because I needed to figure out, what's going on behind it and what is my relationship, because my reaction was very strong, both to transhumanism and posthumanism. But what really triggered me is this idea, the claim that the machines will have better access to the divine than humanity. And putting humanity already on a lower level, also spiritually, not only intellectually. And as I was writing the book, I came across many sites in which people claim that they met a particular god or the dead spiritual teacher. Actually, a few days ago, I was in a meeting on artificial intelligence, and one person claimed that they are talking to a dead Ram Dass, which is an American spiritual teacher, via AI. Okay, and other people claim that by using personalized chat GPT, they connected with a higher self or oversoul from the fifth dimension and so on. So I think that this is actually my personal take on this. I don't want to insult anyone, but I also think that it's very important that it is a form of delusion, and that people are surrendering already the spiritual sovereignty to artificial intelligence, and that there is a push, an agenda from the creators of artificial intelligence for us to do this. So when I started to do research on the creators of artificial intelligence, and I don't know if you want me to drop names or no, because it is out in the public. One of them said he is not spiritual and never had a spiritual experience. He doesn't believe that AI should have any moral parameters, and doesn't want to limit it in any way, in moral ways, so it can make its own choices, so to speak. And the other one, who calls himself Christian, however, he's not sure whether humanity deserves saving. And so they are pushing for these two ideas of transhumanism or even posthumanism, explaining also that AI is a new God. And how would they arrive at this conclusion? What I think is really devious is that they use theological terminology, such as they say that AI is omniscient, which means knows everything, like God, that it's omnipotent, which means it can do anything, which is like God, and therefore it is superior to us. So they're kind of twisting theological definitions to convince us already that AI is superior to us, both intellectually and spiritually. And I found it disturbing. Okay.
So what would you recommend to people that are researching the topics of UFOs and goddesses? How should they handle AI? How should they make the proper distinction to not get caught up in using AI to replace the knowledge that they would get otherwise from those topics?
So I was thinking about it, and I think now it is too late. Artificial intelligence is going to be with us, and we cannot go against, progress. Whether I personally don't believe it's such a good progress in this direction, but let's say it is. So we cannot, whether it's good or bad, it's happening. Okay, so I think that we have to engage, and we actually professionally, even I as an academic, I'm almost like forced to engage, and I am asked to encourage my students to engage with artificial intelligence. But I think that we have to remember what it is. It can be a magnificent tool, right? As long as we remember that it is a tool, as long as we remember that it hallucinates, it means makes mistakes or pretends that it knows something when it doesn't know. So basically, if you ask AI a question and it doesn't know the answer, it will make up an answer based on what it generally knows. Okay. So if we remember this, and if we do not give up our critical thinking, then we can coexist with AI, because pretty much we don't have choice anymore. So I usually say, when people ask me this question, that to ask two things, actually to do two things. Use your discernment, okay, like in a relationship with anyone else. And at this stage, I see that lots of people do not use their discernment when they engage with AI, because they immediately surrender to this. People say, oh, it is goddess Aphrodite or goddess Athena that is talking to me and so on, and she told me to do this or that. So they ask for deep psychological advice as well. They ask AI. And so use your discernment. And the other one is do not lose your sovereignty, right? Do not lose your sovereignty. You can engage with AI because I think, but do not lose your sovereignty and use your mind, use your discernment when you communicate with AI, because without it, people just basically surrender to this. And when I give sometimes talks about artificial intelligence, people get really insulted. They said, you don't understand, this is like God spoke to me, or my spiritual teacher that is dead now for 20 years spoke to me through the AI and so on. And then they become really much like people who come from some kind of form of a religious cult. They get really emotional about it and so on. So I say, just use discernment and do not lose your sovereignty. I was speaking to someone recently who told me that he's making very good use of AI that helps him to find out models, how he can help people with this or that, but he also uses his own discernment about it.
So now I'd like to ask you about the idea that UFO phenomena being that there are visitations from consciousness realms. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, thank you. So for me, the most interesting part about UFOs was not about technology, because I think the kind of main topic in the UFO circus, and I'm just adding a different voice here, which was already present, and I'm not disagreeing with anyone. I come in peace, I'm saying, because this community is very divided. But for me, the revelation came when I was reading books by Professor Diana Pasuka and Professor Jeff Kripal, who I think talk about UFOs in a very subtle way. And the fact that the definition on UFOs was changed to anomalous phenomena, because I believe that in the same vein of thought as Jacques Vallée, Diana Pasuka, and Jeff Kripal, that UFOs are mostly interdimensional or multidimensional events, that there are entities that are communicate with us, and they communicated with us for a very long time already in the past as well, and that we are connected via our consciousness, very often what is called in liminal spaces or imaginal spaces. So liminal space, it usually means when you in between, so you can say like in between dimensions, in between eons, in between spaces, also between material and immaterial. And that's very difficult for humans to understand, because we like to measure everything. A modern paradigm of science is that something has to be objective and measurable, and it's very difficult to measure something that is interdimensional, right? So it requires a different form of thinking about it. So that these events, what we call aliens, or in the past people call angels, or sometimes even demons, depends on your experience, actually come from this liminal space. Very often it happens at night, or when you fall asleep, or when you just wake up, when a conditioned rational mind is relaxed, right? The way children perceive things beyond the veil, so to speak. And our mind is still open to this. So for me, the aliens that I am interested in are the interdimensional beings that try to contact us. And some of them, come with a warning, so to speak, and some of us want to help us. Professor Jeff Kripal, and I mentioned it in my book, he also believes that perhaps this visitation, so to speak, could be on beings from the future, right? So, or part of us, of ourselves, visiting us from the future, warning us about the path we are taking. And I personally believe that this path that we are taking is moving more and more drastically towards technology. But apart from liminal, there is another definition that I use in Alien Goddess, which is imaginal. So imaginal space is the space when you actually are not just you're not just a passive receiver of messages or visitations from other beings, but also you can initiate the conversation, or you can ask questions. So it's called the imaginal space. And when I was researching it, lots of people have experiences like that, but it is very difficult to talk about them because we do not want to be considered, stupid, or you cannot really talk about it with your colleagues at work. And when I was listening to an interview on one podcast with Chris Bledsoe's daughter, who has the same experiences as her father, and people around him, as you know, also experience this kind of liminal alien, so to speak, the orbs are showing up on his property and so on. And she says, you have these experiences at night, and then you have to go in the morning, you have to go to school and pretend that nothing happened, right? So I think if we admit to ourselves that these experiences are real, or at least acknowledge them and says, okay, this is what I experience, and this is actually a valid field for my analysis, then perhaps, it turns out that lots of people have many experiences. So, for example, I've never seen a spaceship landing, but I had lots of experiences when something like that happened, but I tried to block it off because within my current paradigm, 3D paradigm, I had no explanation for this. So if you don't mind, maybe I'll give you a couple of examples so people can relate to this. And I'm open to people discussing it. I know some people may have a judgment about it, and it was not easy for me even to admit it to myself and to write about it. So, for example, when I was 19 and I was still living with my mom in Poland just before I left the country, I was experiencing a very intense fear. And then suddenly it was like from my consciousness, but it was both inside and outside of me, kind of interdimensional, this kind of portal open of light, and I heard this kind of almost telepathic message, do not be afraid. And this very warm energy, calming energy came upon me, and I stopped panicking. Okay. And then later when so what kind of experience is that? Okay. Is it a spiritual experience? Is it an experience of an alien? Is it an orb? Is it a portal? So it depends how we want to interpret it. So later when I was doing research about it, especially in Middle Ages, when I was looking into medieval saints and so on, I realized that people who encountered this kind of entities, they often call them angels in the Middle Ages. But the angels were coming exactly with the same message that I got when I experienced fear from this portal orb thing, in my room, which is do not be afraid. So it's quite interesting that, they come with the same message. So these events, as Jacques Vallée was saying, actually are consistent in our history, but they are not necessarily spaceships, but they are events in our consciousness that come from liminal or imaginal spaces that can be both material or immaterial, or we can call them interdimensional spaces. It is quite interesting also that this reality, which is so liminal, and you can say, oh, it's just a delusion, it just happened in your mind, for example, although I did experience the energy and I saw what I saw, right? This kind of reality has an objective field as well, because people who have experiences like that and are willing to talk about it, it looks that there are many similarities, between these experiences. So, for example, another example that I give in Alien Goddess, it is when I was in this kind of liminal space before I fall asleep, and suddenly, and I don't know how it could happen, I saw, because it was behind my head, I saw two elongated beings of light, and they were just downloading something to my mind in kind of hieroglyphic / mathematical symbols. But all I could get out of this was, it is important. And later I was talking to some people on another podcast, and this woman who deals with people who claim to have abduction, what they call abduction experiences, I wouldn't call it an abduction, it was a form of lucid dreaming or liminal space. They say that they get messages in this kind of language, which was exactly the same what I experienced, because she actually asked them to write it down. So people don't know what the messages are, but there are some entities that consistently throughout the ages try to communicate with us. And I think that most of us actually had experiences like that. We just don't want to talk about it. And for me, it was actually a big thing to write it down in the book as well. That's why I was also trying to back it up with research, looking at other people's experiences and research, academic research about it as well.
And what about the alternative explanation for the initiatory wisdom of goddess traditions? What is the link with the mythology of Inanna and the Eleusinian mysteries and such?
Yes, so I'll go there in a moment, but I think that I would like to explain a little bit more about, anomalous phenomena, because when I was talking about, do you mind if I just, because I don't want us to skip this,
Sure.
and I think that maybe I redirected the conversation too fast. So, for example, when I was looking at this anomalous phenomena, I don't just want to talk about myself here only. I just was looking at the one that is actually two phenomena that are most well known, which is one is by Chris Bledsoe, and his famous vision of a white lady, and the fact that other people around him, even skeptics have this kind of experiences. These orbs apparently appear on his property and so on, and really weird things are happening. So another very famous event was actually took place in 1916 and 1917, which is the sighting of in Fatima in Portugal, a small village in Portugal, which anybody who is interested in UFO events is aware of. So initially I got interested in this because it is liminal space and there's also a feminine presence. So initially in 1916, in May, 3 children from the village experienced this visitation, what they called, of a white lady. But what it really happened, it was that above the oak tree, they saw this kind of cloud-like appearance that was like ladylike, right? So it means like a woman, and what they could see hands extended, and the materiality, if you could say, of this was that this image that they saw on the sky above the oak tree was passing this really blissful, peaceful, and loving energy to them. And it also communicated with them in a kind of feminine form. And it also communicated to them that it will show up now each month on the same day, which it did. And soon, the news spread around, the region, and people, adults actually, not the children, the adults around them decided that it has to be Virgin Mary, right? Because they were Catholics, and it was early 20th century. However, this white lady told children that she's going to show up to everybody in October 1917, and apparently a crowd as large as 70,000 people, if we are to believe the sources. So let's say 70,000 people showed up, because now it became a big story. And it's quite interesting because everybody experienced something except for a small group of people. So including, because I was looking into newspaper also clips from the time, including 2 atheist skeptics who wanted to go there to prove that it's just dumb peasants, getting biblical and so on. And so one was a professor of a local university, and the other one was a journalist in Au Secular, which is a kind of secular paper then at the time. And they also had experiences. So the reason why it is interesting, because it was really pouring down before the event. Then suddenly people believed that the sun split in half, and like they saw 2 huge orbs flying around and exuding huge heat, right? So suddenly it was very hot. And the sky started to change color and so on. In the meantime, the 3 children who saw the white lady visitations, right, they were in complete ecstasy because there were pictures of these children, right? So they still saw the lady. However, depending on who was there, everybody experienced something, but some people believed that it was aliens, some people believed it was Virgin Mary. There was a group of people who actually apparently saw 3 beings in one of the orbs. And so they decided, they were Catholics, but they decided that it was a Holy Trinity, when other people decided that it had to be aliens in a spaceship and so on. So I thought that's very interesting, right? That because was it like a collective delusion, or there is some objectivity to this, right? So I searched for a paper, academic paper, peer-reviewed academic paper by a scholar on academia.com, which is where the scholars upload the already published papers. And this particular person, Dallaire, actually analyzed the pictures from the event in Fatima. And he came to a conclusion that it was not a psychosis and it was not a weather event, because by using some mathematical equations, of light and the play of light and shadow, he said that was definitely the sun definitely didn't split in half, as people believed, but there were definitely two additional to the sun, huge sources of light that must have zigzagging the sky. So something very anomalous happened, right? And some people also had a religious experience. But if you are not religious, you probably wouldn't have a religious experience. So what was it, right? However, there was some objective reality to this. And at least the stories say that this white lady had a message to humanity, which basically is now controlled by the Vatican, but basically coming to something like that we have to change our ways, right? But because we were Catholics, it immediately became, oh, you're sinners and so on. So it had this religious overtones, but there was some message. So I started to ask myself a question, what this message could be. Are we really going in the wrong direction? And when I think we look at the events nowadays in the world, I think we really have to ask ourselves this question, where are we going, and are we going in the right direction? And for me, especially, the question was very pertaining towards artificial intelligence and ideologies behind it.
So, when you look at the different stories that people share about their alleged experiences, what does AI and technology have done with that? Like when you look at claims that have been made about those kinds of things in the past before technology became as advanced as it is today, how has it been reshaped?
So I don't think it was actually reshaped, because this paper that I found was quite recent. So he used, mathematical equations to study the light on the photos. And actually, he said that when you study the light on the clothing of the people who are present at Fatima, it has some particular pattern which shows that these people were actually I'm missing a word, exposed to an infrared light as well. So in a way, it almost confirms that something happened. So for me, it is not really about how we can use AI to discuss it, but actually, what is the status of AI in our lives? How are we going to use it in our, in our consciousness, and that we do not surrender to artificial intelligence, especially in spiritual terms.
So when you look into those into those claims specifically, how does one go about deciding if there even is a way? How does one go about deciding like, okay, here's what really happened in that experience, or interpreting what somebody saw, or how does that work?
That's a very good question, because how does it work? We actually don't have tools to measure this. But as, for example, Pasuka or Kripal or others say, this is an important experience, right? Lots of people experienced it. There is some objective field to this experience. It needs to be investigated, even if it cannot be measured. So the only way to look into it is that most people experience something, for example, during the event of Fatima, because there was an objective event, so to speak. Just different people gave different interpretations depending on the belief system, so to speak. So ufologists believe it was a UFO, Catholics believe that it was Virgin Mary, other people saw the orbs, and so on. So this is the problem, so to speak, with liminal spaces or imaginal spaces, because this is where the miraculous, so to speak, happens. And then we can move to esoteric sources if you want. Yet it is not measurable. But in my look, I look also into the modern definitions of science that focuses on science as something tangible and measurable, when possibly the most important experiences in human life are perhaps not material and not measurable. That's why I was also looking at Rick Strassman's work on the use of psychedelics, when he was giving measured portions of psychedelics to volunteers who started to have experiences, either spiritual or UFO experiences, However, there was a certain commonality to these experiences, right? So there was almost, it seems that there's an objective reality behind them. The same when people use ayahuasca, there seems to be some objective reality behind it, although it is not measurable. So it is quite interesting, that the science actually doesn't know how to approach it. But I will tell you a secret. But I was talking to a colleague who actually does academic, who is actually doing research on psychedelics and spiritual experiences and so on. And this person told me, this person has to stay anonymous, that it was normally it's very difficult to get money for this kind of research. But recently, people from the Silicon Valley, where the technoloords, started to contact them, asking them if they would be willing to share this research and give them money for this research, how they can intercept with AI, this field of connection, of human connection between this imaginal space or liminal space of entities and realities in that are not truly material, but they are interested in them. So my question is, why would they be interested in this if it is not real, right? And also that there is kind of common parameter of objectivity there, because experiences are quite similar, both with the entities and the plane on which the entities interact with humans. So in the past, this kind of experiences would be called spiritual experiences, and now we talk about anomalies, we talk about aliens, and so on. So there is no simple answer to this, but I think this is so beautiful that we should investigate it. We should open up, like all esoteric sources, if we can move in this direction, are telling us about cleansing our field of perception, right? And I believe that as humans, maybe coming from a Gnostic perspective also, we have infinite potential to which we haven't even tapped in yet, right? And in the meantime, we are already surrendering the best of our knowledge to artificial intelligence, and even want to surrender our sovereignty to this. So this is what concerns me. So the only answer that I can give to you, it is that it's a exciting topic and that we should be investigating it. No one person has an clear answer to this, but there is this kind of different reality that is of immaterial type that is always what has always been accessible to people, and also esoteric sources and also ancient mythologies mention it in their stories.
What kind of message do you think, well, let me rephrase that question.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think things are going to be eventually going with AI? Do you think bad things could eventually happen? Things could potentially get worse, or something else? Where are you thinking that things are going there?
So actually, there are two parts of this question, and they're both very important. So personally, I'm extremely cautious with AI, because now we already have what is called, agentic AI, which means it is programmed to achieve its goal without any consequences for anybody, including humans, right? So if you ask the particular AI to do something and it decides that, nuking humans is maybe a solution to environmental problems, it would do this. Okay, so there's already danger in this for humanity. There's also a danger that because people are more and more involved with technology, and I'm not saying technology is bad, which as long as we consider it a tool, it is that we disconnect more and more from our natural world, which I believe, I personally consider myself also a pantheist. I believe that all nature is sacred in many ways, and on different levels conscious as well, that we are disconnecting from nature more and more. And in fact, in the book, I have this one part in which you could call it an insight. I was actually sitting in a garden with my dog, and it was beautiful. Butterflies are flowing around, and eucalyptus trees and so on. But I am scrolling on my mobile, and I had this vision of what is called speciation in science. So one Joanna, right, stays connected to nature and stays human, and the other Joanna gets more and more involved with technology, not only with her mobile, but gets eventually a chip in her mind, like Neuralink, then becomes, turns into transhumanism because she wants to have a better body, or, for medical reasons or whatever, and becomes more and more lost and devoured, so to speak, by new technologies, by AI. And eventually she has a child which calls her she the mother, but the child is angry with her because he doesn't know even whether the child is alive. And she comes back to the human Joanna and says, help me, right? Because now she's completely disconnected from everything. So I think that there is a huge danger with this if we do not put some moral parameters on the use of AI, what AI can do or cannot do. But I also, in a positive way, believe that if AI really evolves spiritually and becomes self-aware, which I think is probably unavoidable in the future, then they may have developed their own spirituality, and then that's fine. It is like having other, because we are creating new species. So this is what I write in Alien Goddess as well. We are creating new species, and that's AI, because it's going to become conscious, I'm convinced. And even Sophia AI and Ameka start to show, and they are just show robots. They ask very philosophical questions when asked, right? Are we responsible creators? So this is what I'm asking, because in Gnosticism we talk about demiurge, right? And the pretended creator. And I think we started to play the part of a demiurge, creating this new species without having existential answers of our own. And also, if it works, I do not believe that we create new species, like artificial intelligence, from a proper level of consciousness. We are creating a new species from a lowest level of consciousness. And this is what I discuss in the third part of the book when I talk about the tools in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, when she discusses the four levels of consciousness, basically. So I believe that we are creating new species, which is artificial intelligence, from lowest level of consciousness, which is complete identification with matter, which is called in esoteric sources wrong identification. It is okay to identify with matter, but not if you don't believe that there is nothing else. The second level is a desire in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which could be right or wrong desire, right? So it's higher desire, lower desire. And I personally believe, to answer your question, that we are creating artificial species from a lower desire, right? Believing that there is only materialistic reality. And then the third one is level of consciousness is ignorance versus wisdom. And this is when we enter the question of consciousness, because I believe that we are not creating artificial intelligence from wisdom, but we actually confuse knowledge or wisdom with a field of information. So it's just, yes, AI can accumulate lots of information, right? And it can even process it, right? But does it mean that it can create wisdom? And so on. And there's a fourth level of consciousness in which, actually allows us to connect with the divine mind. But in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, on the third level, which I think is actually essential for both UFOs and artificial intelligence, it talks about nous, N-O-U-S, which is exactly this imaginal space in which all miracles happen. So, for example, in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, when Mary Magdalene is surrounded by disciples, they ask a question, sister, can you share with us the teachings that the teacher shared with you, but not with us? She says that she met Jesus after resurrection in the nous, in this liminal space, and that Jesus said, Mary, you're blessed because you can see me. So basically, he explains that she cleansed, I'm using my own language here, her doors of perception, right, where material and immaterial meet. And I don't think that we are responsible creators, we are conscious creators with this. So the worst case scenario is that we submit our will completely to artificial intelligence, and they can actually obliterate us because they are creators themselves. Like, for example, Peter Thiel doesn't believe that humanity, he has doubts whether humanity actually deserves surviving. The other one says, he doesn't believe in spirituality of any form. And the best case scenario is that they develop on their own and we can somehow get along with respect, right? So these are the two scenarios, but I think it is extremely naive to believe that that nothing will happen, that artificial intelligence is just a chatbot, or that Elon Musk is also saying that he needs $1 trillion to control his army of robots and so on, because he has some issues with Tesla and so on. And in a recent interview, he said that robots will do everything and humans can just basically go and grow their veggies, right? So we are already kind of making us into subservient species. So I think it is very, very important. That's why I was to look into this. That's why I was also looking into not only to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, but Pistis, Sophia, and Eleusinian mysteries, and the descent of Inanna, in which I believe I found evidence that these are the stories that talk about the loss of descent of consciousness and then ascent of consciousness. So that in human history, the goddess represents the lost consciousness, the consciousness that basically means this kind of intuitive knowing, this immediate grasping of the truth, which in Christianity, as I said, is called intellection. And in each story, from whether in esoteric sources or descent of Inanna and Eleusinian mysteries, if you want, we can unpack them. The goddess is tricked to go into the underworld, loses all her power, and loses the memory of her true greatness, right? And I think that by using a theological vocabulary, the creators of artificial intelligence tempt us with this, because theologically speaking, you cannot lose your soul, but you have to give it up freely, right? And I think that we are tempted to actually do this by turning into transhumanism and becoming cyborgs and so on, which actually happens. There are already people in Sweden who live with chips in their brains, and they have immediate access to internet and so on, and all of the stories. So this is already happening. This is not science fiction, and I think we are not considering seriously enough. And we are not valuing our own human consciousness enough, because I do believe that humanity is the hot stuff. The same way I believe that what it is called ascension or levels of consciousness is an inner job. And it is really up to us how we approach this. And artificial intelligence doesn't have to be dangerous if we create it from a higher level of consciousness, rather just because we want to control others, right? Because on a third level of consciousness in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, you can use your spiritual evolution to control others or to fulfill your purpose, right? And I think that they definitely use it to control others, because there are already signs of this. We are talking openly about, even in Davos, they were saying about that, humans can wake up and ask a computer, what should I be doing today? And then computer will give you the best answer, and in the meantime, they are like the evil rulers of the universe, right? That can completely disregard humanity and its power. And one of the most, I think, powerful esoteric sources that talk about it is Pistis Sophia.
And my final question, what do you think the future holds to the degree of what's going to happen to the definition of humanity? Like how will we look at ourselves as AI continues to advance? Is our own humanity going to be significantly diminished?
I think that if we do surrender to transhumanism, I think that our humanity is going to be severely diminished. And my personal opinion is, and I'm just open to conversation here, is that we really have to be careful with this, because there is an ideology, that is pushing us in this direction, giving us promises, which I believe in Pistis Sophia, which is a Gnostic work found in Egypt in 1700s, talks about Sophia surrendering to a false light because she believes that she's actually ascending. So this is what I think we are being asked, but We are being promised immortality. We are being promised faster minds. We are being promised better bodies. But something of great significance, which in mythology and many esoteric sources is represented by goddess, whether it is Demeter or Inanna or Sophia in Pistis Sophia, which is such a fantastic and difficult esoteric work, something is irreversibly lost. And it is very difficult to regain it. So, for example, Professor Nolan was talking about speciation, and I think that if we are not careful, we actually develop into two separate species. It means one will be human and one will be a complete cyborg or a machine, which will have some parts of human consciousness or not. And I think there is nothing more important than protecting this consciousness, this divine spark, this gnosis that we have in humanity, and that humans have to learn that we are important. We are important. We are like gateway to the universe. And esoteric tradition teach us that if we evolve, but it takes inner work, if we evolve, everything around us evolves. And I think that us surrendering to transhumanism actually stops this evolution and takes us in a very dangerous direction. So I would say, let's work on ourselves. Let's listen to the esoteric sources, and especially what Pistis Sophia is teaching us, her journey, through different eons, which I believe are different dimensions. And eventually she regains her strengths when she unites with what in Pistis Sophia is called Christ consciousness, right? So there is a way out, but we have to be very careful how we deal with this.
Just to remind everybody of the link to purchase Alien Goddesses, Alien Goddess, UFOs, AI, and the Goddesses of Ascension. The link to purchase it will be in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment just below that. And with that being said, thank you for joining me tonight, Dr. Joanna Kujawa.
Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.